Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sabrina Siddiqui. I'm a political reporter at The Guardian, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of you and to have the privilege of such wonderful panelists who are going to talk about repairing our relationship with experts. Look, I think with populism really on the rise in global politics, with climate skepticism, there's obviously a lack of trust among the public when it comes to academics, policymakers, and we really want to try and understand today how do we restore that trust. I'm actually going to really try and have this be more of a conversation, not so much a Q&A, because I know that everyone has a lot to say, but I want to just offer some food for thought for myself being here from Washington, D.C., and a reporter who covers the Trump administration currently. I thought that I would kick it off with a quote that I think really amplifies the skepticism in facts and the truth and just scientific research. You had Scotty Nell Hughes, who is a top surrogate for President Trump and a former paid commentator on CNN, say, and I quote, one thing that has been interesting this campaign season to watch is that people say facts are facts, but they're not really facts. Everybody has a way of looking at things. It's like a glass half full. There's no such thing, unfortunately, anymore as facts. So if you're able to follow that thread of logic, it was the way of explaining why the current president often perpetuates falsehoods, which are now being interpreted by many people as simply an opinion. And then also you had parallels as someone also working for The Guardian when we covered Brexit in the UK. Despite all of the forecasts of what kind of economic impact it would have had for the UK to exit the European Union, and all of the economists really warning of the calamity that might ensue, the Leave campaigner Michael Grove said, people in this country have had enough of experts. Now, we have some very good experts with us here on this stage, and I would like for them to respond not just to the statements that I just read, but I think to really speak to, how this gap can be bridged, especially as it seems like we're erring more and more on the side now of an alternative reality. So I'll actually just let each of them make an introductory statement, a very brief, to kind of tell you a little bit about where they stand. And why don't you, Mr. Minister, start it out, if you can.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Web Summit for this opportunity, and of course, welcome all of you to Portugal. I'm sure that you are going to enjoy this moment, and I'm also sure that you are coming back to Portugal in another occasion. Well, this is a very pertinent issue, and I think that today, in this session, we need to at least try to answer some of the main important questions in this important dialogue between the political world and the scientific world. How can we restore the credibility of science? Why should we trust science? Because we were speaking a little bit before the session, and we all identify that we have a crisis of confidence in science. And how can we, in a collective way, guarantee our collective trust in science? And as I told you, and as the guy that introduced this panel told, I have myself this dialogue because I'm a scientist, my background is science, I'm a researcher, and right now I'm a politician. So we always have two faces, and I also have two faces. And we need to restore the faith in experts. And I think that when we think about scientists and when we think about the political world, we are trying to have a kind of binary system. And I think that the binary system is too poor to explain the reality, either in science or in the political world, well, as in life. I think that just to start, we need to understand two important things. One of them, that experts, scientists, the researchers in general, they don't live in a bubble of purity and aseptic reality. That's something that we know. And on the other hand, the politicians may not live, at least in a long-term way, in a bubble of emotions, as some of our politicians try to live. So I think that we need to relate to truth and to the facts, all of us, because they both need experts and also the politicians to be able to survive. Yeah. And I think that we need to speak a little bit about this dialogue between the political world and the scientific world, because it's extremely necessary to know how can we make bridges and how can we destroy some of the walls that we have right now.
Yes. Carlos?
Hello, and thank you very much. I'm just, as you know, I'm at the European Commission, and for us, the importance of this subject is crucial for the future of Europe. And why? Because we kind of lost this connection in between people and science. And so the big political decision is how you can reconnect that science that used to be connected in between people and science, and that we lost the connection. And one of the reasons is definitely that chain in between fundamental science and the products, it became very complex and very long. I mean, in 1940, when the transistor was created, people would understand the link in between the fundamental principles of science and the transistor. Today is much more difficult to explain to a young kid what's the principles of physics and chemistry and a smartphone. And so we have to explain better the process of science. And people are tired of facts and numbers. People don't want to listen to you telling you more numbers and facts. So we have to get better at explaining that process of science. Scientists have to be more humble, and politicians too, of things that you know and things that you don't know. But you have to get better at explaining the process. The second point that I wanted to make is that I'm one of these believers that at some point in the future, we will have places of trust and places that we don't trust. And you see that today in several sectors. I mean, when you are sick and you're looking on the internet for a solution, you want to go to a place that you trust. And you go to the places that you find are the ones that can give you the right information. Not too long ago, there was a case of plagia at the Karolinska Institute. And suddenly, the number of people that used to go to the website went down dramatically because people lost trust. So at some point, I think we will have some kind of like a world with two kinds of internet. One that we trust and one that it's for leisure and that we don't trust. I don't know where we get there, but at some point we will. And the third point that we talk here before coming is that if you open up, if you are in an open world, you have to have more integrity. And so you have to be much tougher on research integrity. You have to be much tougher when people don't abide to respecting the rules. And that's something that is for the scientists, is for the politicians, and also for the universities to get tougher on that. And if you get these three things right, I think that we can actually get to a better place. We just don't know how long it will take.
Yes. Thank you so much. Kamila?
So I think if we want to increase trust in science, we do need to get the basics right first. And that is that we need to have access to our science. Now, Carlos Moedas very rightfully says there are the places on the internet that are trusted, but one big problem that we have today that these trusted places are actually closed. They're in the subscription space, so people can actually not access the scientific information. So this is a fact, like that I would like to point out that very few people know about. The world spends worldwide about $2 trillion to fund research, and we publish the results as scientific papers. About 2.5 million papers are being published every single year. And this is what people don't know. 90% of these scientific results, research papers, are in this trusted yet inaccessible space behind very expensive paywalls. Very few researchers can access it. It's almost entirely invisible to journalists who report on the science, to patients, businesses, even policymakers. So we have to open this space up. And the good news is that there are people who are working on this, from researchers to Carlos Moedas, who's actually leading now what's called the open science revolution or evolution transition, where our science is being put into the open space. I, for example, started Frontiers together with my husband about 10 years ago, and is today one of the largest open science platforms in the world. And essentially what we do, we have 70,000 researchers on our platform that peer review research articles and certify their quality. And that's important because what enters the stream of knowledge needs to be trusted. And once these articles are out there in the open, anybody in the world can really, for free, access, read, and download these articles. And that's, again, important because people are actually hungry for science. So I think, like they're extremely hungry. The articles get, per month, more than 10 million views and downloads, which is amazing for something that is very specialized content. And I can tell you, almost everybody in the world with an access to internet is accessing, consuming science. Now, the other good news and the point that I would like to make, that Europe today is leading these open science revolutions. So Commissioner Moedas here, together with EU science ministers, have mandated just last year that within the next 3 years, by 2020, all scientific content needs to be free to access within Europe. And they're not stopping at just the research articles. They're also now mandating the Open Science Cloud, which is for the first time in human history going to give us access to the research data behind those articles. Now you'll be able to trace down any type of statements and debunk climate change deniers because you can point them down directly to the source, and you can as well see the data. I don't think that people are tired of data and numbers. So important thing is as well, and which just makes me proud to be part of this European open science evolution, is that Europe's really leading the way. And today is really well ahead of the US and as well China, who are a couple of years behind this entire development. So in summary, for me, just finally, if we want to build trust, we gotta make the science open.
Thank you. Dr. Carl.
So I think it's wonderful that everybody in the world will be able to read scientific papers. I'm not convinced that everyone in the world is going to take the effort to really understand scientific papers. But maybe this will be a big aid to journalists who can afford to dig in and translate scientific papers into terms that the public will be willing to accept. Actually, I'm a little bit concerned about what constitutes an expert. We have a famous case in the United States, a very famous scientist born in 1910 who won the National Medal of Science, which is a big deal, very big deal in the United States. He was the president of Rockefeller University. He, in his later years, it may have been old age that did it, he first denied that smoking was, the connection, the link between smoking and cancer and smoking and health in general. And then he moved on to deny global warming, and actually was one of the architects of the relatively infamous Oregon petition, where they rounded up a bunch of people who claimed they were scientists who denied that there was any such thing as global warming. And what makes this particularly tragic is this guy, his name was Frederick Seitz. The thing that was particularly tragic is he was at one time president of the National Academy of Sciences, which was instituted in 1863 to provide good scientific information to the U.S. government, and is by far currently the most reliable source of real scientific information in the United States. Anyway, you have to worry about people straying out of their expertise and claiming to be experts in a field that they know that really have not investigated at all seriously.
Thank you so much. I think, did you have a point
Well,
you wanted to make, Tiago?
This is one of the important starting points of this discussion. Big data is no data, or it is really big data when we have access to such quantity of information. Who are the ones that are going to have access to this information, and at the same time, are they capable to have positive access to all this information. And I think that we have 3 or 4 important facts that it's important to understand that with this quantity of information and science, we go to a chaotic process or to real progress. And it's what we have. Because when we have such quantity of information, we start to have someone telling that is not reliable information because it's too much, and some of them it's not perceptible to the most of the people, so it's no data, so I invent a fact that is not related to that data. Humankind never knew as much as we know right now, first, and this is important. At the same time, we never have such a number of technological resources and accessible, shared by so many people. So it can be a problem or it is a positive thing. And we never had such a number of people that are authors and at the same time entrepreneurs. So we have these people with the authorial perspective and at the same time people that want to apply this knowledge. And at the same time, worldwide, we never had so many people expressing their rational and at the same time their emotional through different ways. And at the same time, we, the others, have capacity to read the rational and the emotional contents of those people. So with this, do we have chaos or do we have progress in science and then in the decision making of the political world? And what are we making as a society? And I don't have a linear answer to this, and I think that it's a key point that we should try to understand. In my opinion, we don't have chaos with this, we have progress. But we need to have some borders and some frontiers.
Yes. So one thing I'm hearing from all of you is the need to engage the public more in the process. And I know, Kamila, you were talking about the fact that so much of the research is subscriber-based. It's behind a paywall. And so, you know, that's one thing, is if you just remove that barrier. But what are some other disruptive ways that you could bring consumers into the process so that there is not this expectation that they have to blindly trust the research, but there's more of a shared ownership of that research and accountability as well?
So,
No, you go.
I think, like it's very important that people do understand science and that they understand the scientific method, because everything is today based on science. Our entire economy is a knowledge economy, and every dollar that we make is somewhere anchored to science and science results. So I think this process needs to start very early. It needs to start, and it's not an immediate solution, it's a long-term solution, and I think we are well on track in achieving that. It needs to start with our children, whether it's in the school or in kindergartens. One thing that we, for example, as well do at Frontiers is to take this cutting-edge research, so, like really stuff that's coming out today out of the labs and is being published in scientific journals, and we translate these articles together with kids so that they understand why it is important to simulate the brain, or how the microbiome influence our decision-making process, for example. And the idea is that if an 8-year-old understands and participates, then as well their grandmother will understand it, the policymaker will understand it, and the journalist will understand why this is important and what science is about.
No, just a couple of points. First of all, we're very happy at the European level to lead this movement of open science, open data and open access, and very proud that the European Union ministers accepted that we have to go on that direction. But I wanted just to say that I think that we somehow lost this connection with people. And I think that, as the professor was saying, we'll never get people to understand all the facts and to read the scientific articles, but you can create the passion for it. And I think we lost that. I mean, there's the famous story when JFK goes and visits NASA, and there was a janitor with a broom, and he asked, "What are you doing here?" And he says, looks at the president, and, "Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon," right? That janitor, he didn't understand really the science, but he had that purpose and he felt that mission. And so one of the things we've been working for the next program of science in Europe is this idea of creating missions. It's a very difficult idea because you don't want to be ridiculed in the missions you create, and you know that a lot of the missions you'll never get there. We know all that Nixon in the US decided to have this mission to cure cancer because that's related to people, but then it never happened. But there's a lot of things that came out from that. A lot of the treatments for HIV came from exactly that mission. Why? Because it engaged people. And I think that my purpose, at least as a politician, is to create those missions where people in the street understand what we do. Because if you just tell people that you're putting 80 billion in science and you're putting 1 billion to study the brain, people in the street don't know what's that. They don't know what's the purpose of that. But if you tell them that you're looking and you'll be the first to cure Alzheimer, then people understand that. And so we have to have a fine balance in between the scientists and our work, but we have to get these link better connected, and then people would actually engage, and they will not feel so far from these facts that we're talking about.
Yes. It sounds like what you're saying is that the messaging is a big component of this, that it needs to be more of a simplistic message that is more accessible to the average user. I am kind of curious though, because you have cases where even though the research has been clear for a very long time, because of the digitization of information, I mean, the internet offers unlimited access for people to go and research any particular topic and then come up with all of this come up with sources that fit their particular way of thinking. And so you have a movement, and it's certainly in the US and some other parts of the world, where people are rejecting, for example, vaccines, even though that information is publicly available. I mean, physicians are still overwhelmingly telling parents, you should vaccinate your child, but they have access to articles on the internet that are telling them that they should not. So how do you what is the answer to that?
Well, I think
Kamila's eager to. You go ahead first.
I think
that's really what you think, that people have access to the information, but it is exactly as you say. They have access to blogs,
to
they
Facebook.
have trusted to what you would call the untrusted internet. It's not the validated, the certified. The research articles themselves,
Yes.
90% of the vaccine, the medical, all health research is behind a paywall. It is not accessible. So people actually do not have access to this particular
Are
information.
you confident, though, that people would seek out those articles if they were not behind a paywall?
A lot of people would. I mean, like I'm seeing it like on
but
our platform.
we have a language barrier. Most of the people don't speak the language of science,
speak
and that's
science,
a real problem. I think that the more important than that, one of the important barriers is the question of literacy, and the construction and the building of global, well, firstly European and then global citizenship. And two of the literacies are extremely important. One of them is the scientific literacy. How can we teach our children, our young people, to pay attention to science, to understand why science? And the question is, in some of the schools, some of the kids ask me, Mr. Minister, why should we believe in science? And the question is, sometimes it's simple, but it's the one that I have because it's the only set of tools that we have. We don't have other sets of tools to truly try to test and try to force any given theory or praxis. And science is the only set of tools that we have. And on the other hand, I think that it's extremely important to increase the social media and the media literacy. It's extremely important that the new generations will have a package of skills to try to understand that they are in a plethora of stimuli, and some of them, they just need to put some barriers individually and collectively, because fake news are there, and fake news are, as we know, a problem in our society nowadays.
Dr. Curl, did you want to chime in?
Well, the one comment that I thought about is unleashing the science literature onto the public is sort of like asking people to take a drink out of a fire hydrant. It's it's essentially overwhelming. It's quite true that there are people who are opposed to mandatory vaccination, and it's a very difficult thing to. They're very vocal. They try to spread the news that it's, this is going to cause autism because of this discredited British paper that came out decades ago, and I don't understand it. It's like you're imposing your will on my children to be vaccinated, and I don't want you to be able to do that. And they're infringing on my freedom to not have my children vaccinated. And of course, as long as not too many people do that, you get this phenomenon of herd immunity, so that the things like measles don't spread. But I don't know how you talk people out of this frame of mind. It's quite clear that they're not interested in the facts.
So that kind of brings us full circle to the way that I kicked off this conversation. And incidentally, we are going to have to wrap up. So what I'd like for each of you to do is, leave our audience with, your kind of closing argument here. What do you want them to walk away with from this discussion? We can go down the row as we did before.
Well, I think that the existence itself of a kind of post-facts era, the fact that we have a single fake news every single day, sometimes in the mainstream media, it's a proof that experts are needed more than ever, and at the same time that politicians and the political world cannot live long, and that they must understand that they are not able to live long if they don't believe that science should be inside their offices, not in a strict sense, but that they really need to understand that not just with emotions they are and feelings they are going to survive. Yeah. They need to put something more. And you told that quote from President.
The president surrogate. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
President
Abraham
Trump
Lincoln
surrogate.
had that one that you can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. And that's extremely important. You cannot just have a kind of set of fake news and believe that you truly can survive forever with that set of fake news. So it's important to understand that the basis should be another one, and this dialogue between the scientific world and the political world must persist and be even stronger every single day.
Thank you. And Carlos, if you
My
can
message just to say that I see it as in this turmoil as a great opportunity for Europe, that you, the ones that are not from Europe, you're very welcome to come here to participate in our programs. More and more we have opened our program to all parts of the world because we want to be the center of that science. We're 7% of the world. We produce more than 34% of the scientific papers in the world. And this year, for the first time on the top 1% citations of the world, Europe comes ahead. So I see hope in the future. I think that politicians can use emotions, as Tiago was saying, but in the right way. Yeah, and I think that we need those emotions to help us on science. I think that you are in a period where people, they don't want to be told what to do. They want to understand it. If I go to my doctor today, I don't want my doctor just to tell me what to do. I want him to explain me the process. And so we have to invest on that, on explaining things in a very easy way. One of the nicest encounters I have in my life was Alan Alda, the American actor, that has a center just to help scientists to communicate. And I think that you need help in how to communicate. And that's something that we have to actually teach you. And you have to be humble enough to learn.
Kamila?
I say unleash the science, make it all open, because that's going to have amazing consequences for all of Europe and the world. It's going to accelerate innovation, because everything builds on everything. It's going to massively boost our economies, because every dollar that we make today is related to science. And thirdly, it's going to build the foundation for trust. People want to have access to science.
Thank you. And Dr. Curl, your closing message?
Well, I mentioned the National Academies, and their mission is to investigate areas of controversy and ambiguity and try to get the best thinking, put out the best thinking on this. And, you know, you can go to the National Academy's websites and look up any topic you want and get relatively definitive information about that topic. Nobody does that. Nobody knows that they can do this. So I think that the information is there, but getting it actually to the public is the real bottleneck.
Well, wonderful. Thank you all so much for being with us and joining us, and thank you to this wonderful panel. I mean, we could go on and on, but I think we've already slightly overstayed our welcome. I'm getting the gesture over there. But Minister Tiago, Brandão, Rodrigues, Kamila, Carlos Moedas, Kamila, Markram, and Dr. Robert Curl, thank you so much again.